From beautiful downtown Sacramento, it's time for Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach blanket fort bingo. Beach blanket fort bingo. Fort bingo. Spouse has got a show when you really want to know what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beach blanket fort bingo. Fort bingo. Art and music, golden blue, and your favorite comics too. Grab a spot and settle in, 'cause it's high time we begin. Beach blanket fort bingo podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hello and welcome to Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. I'm your host, Stephen Schnee. My regular co-host, Ronnie Barnett, is currently on assignment. But on this episode, I am joined by a very special guest. Now, originally, I was going to chat with actor and comedian Matt Geiler, but he had a scheduling conflict and wasn't able to participate. So instead, he sent along his doppelganger, an immensely talented singer-songwriter and musician by the name of Frederick Julius. Now, Frederick Julius has just released a brand new album entitled Lonely Boy, which features some incredibly emotional pop songs filled with heavenly harmonies and emotional depth that seems to be missing in modern pop music. It will lift you up and bring you to tears in equal measure. And I'm so grateful to have him here today to chat about his new album and so much more. So please join me in welcoming Frederick Julius to the Blanket Fort. Welcome, Frederick.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Before we chat about the new album, I want to go, all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first realized that you wanted to become a musician? I mean, was it a singular moment or a series of events?
I think it was, I don't know if there was like a singular, moment that was like a crystallizing thing, but I think when I really started to feel like, oh, this is something I want to find out about or I want to do, I was very young. My brother Mike and I grew up on a farm in Nebraska, and we got into my parents had each like their own little collection of records, and my mom's records were all Motown, Stax. There were a lot of soul records.
Mm-hmm.
She had a lot of Wilson Pickett. She had a lot of Arthur Connolly type stuff. And then my dad's 45s were all Beach Boys records. And my brother and I used to play those. And I think we started playing and trying to sing along with them and follow along when we were, maybe, 8 or 9, something like that.
Right. Right.
And so that age, that was the age I felt like I want to figure out how to do that. Because the sounds were, I loved drinking the sounds, but there was also this feeling of like, at some point I want to figure out how they get those sounds onto this thing that plays. I want to find out how they do that. So I think that's when it started for me. And on the farm, it was really kind of a weird adventure to go on, because I mean, there's nothing out there. So my brother and I were constantly like going into the bathroom. We had this system where we got a synthesizer when my brother was like 10, and we had these 2 boom boxes, and we'd cram everything into the bathroom because there was tile in there, so it had kind of a natural reverb, And I had read about like echo chambers and stuff, and so we'd cram everything in there, and we'd literally like lean down. We'd be playing on the synthesizer, and then we'd like lean our heads in between these 2 boom boxes we'd be playing and singing 2 parts over, you're positioning your head because we had no microphones. So we're trying to like adjust the volume and like get our head placement right to kind of get like a mix right. So we'd sing two parts over this synthesizer, and then we'd sing that into one boombox, and then we'd rewind the tape, play that out of the tape, and then have another tape in the other boombox, and then we'd sing a couple more parts on top of it. So it was like early overdubbing, but it was all these, you know, kind of childish attempts to replicate stuff that we were hearing, and then, you know, the scant information in pre-internet days that you could dig up about like how did they overdub harmonies or whatever. So it was pretty young when I was like, I got to figure out how to make that stuff.
Well, when you were doing that, and you were recording your own stuff, were you doing covers, or were you like writing your own little ditties?
We were writing our own stuff. That was kind of from the beginning, and it was just like, oh yeah, let's go write a song. And the first song we wrote was a song called Her Mustang, which was we're, I don't know, 10 years old, so we know nothing about cars or girls at all whatsoever. But I think under the Beach Boys influence, we're like, yeah, let's get a song. Like the thing we conjured was a song called Her Mustang. It was probably like 45 seconds long, and it went something like there's terrible lyrics, but it went something like, when I see her on the street with her shiny Ford Mustang, her looks can't be beat because her car's always hustling. Mustang, Mustang, go, go, go. Mustang, Mustang, go, go, go. As she's looking real cool and the car's looking fine now, I want her to be mine, gotta drive that car somehow. Mustang, Mustang, go, go, go. Mustang, Mustang, go, go, go. And that was it. That was like our first attempt at recording. I don't know what happened to that. I'm sure by now it's disintegrated.
When you decided that you wanted to create music, what was the instrument that you were first drawn to?
Piano, always.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because I mean, if you could call it formal music training, you know, I was in band in like grade school and high school, but I played the oboe by virtue of the fact that when they tested us on instruments, they had me blow through this double reed, and I think I was like one of maybe two kids that could actually make any kind of sound through it. You know, it's really hard to blow through those things. And so they put me on the oboe, which I dutifully played, you know, like up through college. But so I don't have any formal training in the piano, but I learned to use it as an expressive instrument. I learned to play enough and put chords together, and for me it was always like that's the place I go to sit down and, you know, get emotions out, and also as a writing tool. You know, that I would never say, you know, hey, come watch me play the piano in concert. You know, but I can play well enough to you know, to write on it. And then also, you know, like when we get in the studio with session musicians, you know, I can kind of chord out and be like, hey, the feeling goes this way. And then real musicians will be like, I got it.
Now, you know, you're a Renaissance man of sorts, you know, actor, comedian, artist, musician, singer, songwriter, rapper, dancing pumpkin man, so much more. But in regards to pursuing a career using just one of those many talents, did you focus on comedy first, or was it music that came first, but in terms of your interest, but did comedy come first in terms of success?
Yeah, that's exactly how it happened. So the comedy thing happened kind of early, and also that wasn't like a thing I set out to do. I mean, I was like, I enjoyed making people laugh for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And but I mean, I was always playing music and writing music. And then when I was in high school, we, through like speech and theater, there was a summer where a bunch of friends that I had that were into that thing, we all kind of gravitated towards the improv thing. So we would hang out and do improvisation with each other. And there was the summer before my senior year, everybody was trying to not get jobs, like straight jobs. And everybody's parents were kind of on their case to get them and be responsible. And we were like, we got to think of something. So our bright idea was to go down to a comedy club in Omaha, Nebraska, which is my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And we literally walked into the comedy club and we're like, hey, we're a teen improvisation troupe, and we'd love to come in here on Monday nights when you're dark and do an all improv teen show. And the guy was like, great, let's do it. And so we did. We started doing these shows, and that was the first time when I was 17. We had a bunch of kids. Everybody was from different schools, so all these different kind of groups came to these shows. We get like 100 kids at a show, and I'd walk out of there with $60 or something at the end of the night. And so every week that summer, it was like, oh, that was the first time I was like, oh, you could do this. And then we started doing like these chain comedy clubs, like the Funny Bone would hire us to go out to these different cities and do our thing. And through that, we started doing like a lot of corporates and a lot of colleges.
Wow.
And it kind of slowly built up. So by the time I was in college, that was kind of like I don't know. I mean, for a college student, kind of a lucrative part-time job.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the direction I went in after school.
With your, I guess you could say, stand-up, you had the best of both worlds, because you would combine that gift of improv with music.
Yeah. Now, that was kind of my deal, was to like, I always think it's so interesting because like I never wanted to do just like stand up and like write jokes. And I love improvisation because I like not really knowing what's going to happen, but it always kind of veered back into music, like I'm good at making up music off the cuff. So that's kind of where I fit into this group. And then when I started doing solo stuff, I was just like, oh, it's just going to be an all musical improv thing. And that's kind of what I stuck with. And that's how I started to, once we moved to LA, that's how I kind of fell in with like this group of people like Wayne Brady and all these musical improvisers, which is a small, weird world.
Yes. Yeah. Some folks may not be familiar with all of your talents, but I hate to bring it up, but everyone seems to know the Dancing Pumpkin Man.
Yeah, man, it's an internet legend.
Now, does it get a little frustrating that's the most popular thing? Because I can imagine it being like, as if, the Doobie Brothers, they have this great, huge catalog. But then what if the only thing people remembered them for was for being on What's Happening?
I mean, I'm not going to lie and say like, there's definitely some days where you're just like, oh God, that thing again, like it just won't die. It just rises from the dead every year,
Yeah.
But the thing about art is, and it takes, your creativity takes a myriad of forms. I mean, there's albums that are produced, or there's a masterpiece painting, and then there's sketchbooks that are filled with scribbles, or there's parts of lyrics that you wrote down on a napkin, and it's all part of the same, I believe it's all part of the same stuff. But once it's out of you, you can't really control what resonates with somebody, or what they connect with. That's the thing about being an artist, is you don't, it's kind of a remnant of a process, and once the piece is out there, people have their reaction to it. So there's sometimes when I'm like, why, like, out of all the stuff. But then again, it's kind of like, well, that brings joy to somebody somewhere,
Yeah.
So that's a good, the final analysis, I think that's just a good thing, it's definitely not the most, like, I wouldn't consider it the most important or best thing I've ever done. To me, it's kind of like I was goofing off and it got captured on camera, and then, it got its initial traction because somebody at BuzzFeed, I think it was, happened upon it and was like, yo, this is the greatest Halloween video in the history of the internet. And that's what kind of became like the initial lightning rod to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like your Star Wars kid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a total, I had forgotten about it. I mean, it had been kind of sitting around for 3 years before that happened. So before before somebody else took it and ran with it and promoted it, it was just something that had, I don't know, like 100 views, that was like kind of sitting in obscurity, Yeah. And even when my producer, who we had all moved away, and he called me in LA, and he was like, oh, you got to go on BuzzFeed, man. The pumpkin dance is like blowing up. And I'm like, is it blowing? Should it blow up? I don't know if that's who's doing this. You know what I mean? I thought it was suspect, but
was there a feeling of pride or dread at that moment?
There was kind of a, you know what the feeling was, Steve? It was like if somebody found something unfinished, or, listened to a song that wasn't ready to be heard, or that it was like goofing off, like you didn't really mean for it to, yet like her Mustang, like a total goof. And so the feeling was like, really, that thing? Why? Like, that's like, there's so many, I'm looking at that and I'm like, there's so many things wrong with it. The audio's terrible. The costume was thrown together. Like, if I really wanted to make that thing, I'd do it in a totally different way, but then it wouldn't be the accidental thing that it is. So my feeling was like, what are you going to do? And your analogy of like the Doobie Brothers, or an artist that maybe has like a novelty hit, and it's so big that nobody knows the rest of their catalog, I think is kind of apt, because you can't control that stuff. So
yeah, exactly.
Lately, I've been sleeping in the afternoon. Lately, I've been sleeping in the afternoon. Throw all my cares away
a lot of actors, comedians, people who are not in music, they turn around and they release music using their name, hoping that their name brings credibility. But you did not do that. You actually released an album under the name Frederick Julius in 2014 called The Garden at Dusk.
Yeah.
Did you choose to release it under Frederick Julius because you wanted to separate the two? And did you even let your fans know that this was coming out, or were you kind of releasing it on the sly?
To answer the first part of your question, the Frederick Julius was a conscious decision. My middle name is Frederick.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's first name is Frederick, middle name Julius. His dad's name was Frederick Julius. His dad's name was Julius Frederick. And when I was younger, I don't know, I just liked I always thought it was cool to have kind of an amorphous thing. Like, I like the name Frederick Julius as a band.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea of, like, maybe this is sometimes one guy, maybe it's four, maybe it's six, you never quite know. Kind of like Conor Oberst or Bright Eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
it's kind of a ever-changing group of musicians. And so it was just kind of and also there's a lot of one kid, my oldest kid is in my oldest son Eddie is in college, and one of his friends likes the music amazingly. A 19-year-old girl digs the music, and she came up when I was visiting, and she said, I love the music, but you write a lot about your dad. Like, and I was like, and I think that's the other part of it, yeah, there's a lot of musical treatment of, father-son dynamics and relationships in some of my tunes. And so I think that was maybe another reason why I picked my dad's name as the name of my musical project, where I kind of deal with some of that terrain.
This is a wonderful debut. Now, was this, did you go into the studio and actually say, I'm recording this album, or did you just have a bunch of songs that you thought, yeah, these fit together as an album, I'm going to put this out?
Yeah, it was more the latter. They were songs that I think all the songs on there were written, between 2008 and like 2012-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So there was like a 4-year period where and my intention was to get demos, get something down,
Mm-hmm.
and make proper recordings later.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just such a laborious process to get them out, because at the time I was writing all those, I was also, doing the comedy stuff and, trying to build that career, and always going to auditions and doing shows and traveling and blah, blah, blah. So it was in the cracks, and it got to the point where I felt like I was never going to get it done. And my wife, Jen, actually came up with a super brilliant idea, because I had gotten the tracks to a point where I'm like, okay, well, now I'm happy, like, giving these to a producer so that they know the direction. And she was like, what if you just put it out like as is right now? And I was like, that's crazy talk. That's insane. And she was like, no, it could, you wouldn't have to, you could call it like a sketchbook of songs, it would be like a really intimate type of release,
Mm-hmm.
And the more I thought about it, I was like, my assumption is that nobody's going to listen
Right.
to this.
Right.
Maybe 3 people are going to hear it, and all of them live in my house. So I loved that idea because it was like a really low pressure way. And sometimes, like you are so next to something that you're not even hearing it straight anymore,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you've spent so much time with it that you just like, you don't really know what else to do. And so it just appealed to me to be like, oh, what if this album is just like kind of a watercolory sketchbook of tunes or partial tunes
Mm-hmm.
or glimpses of tunes that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought of it that way, I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so that's how we put that out. And it felt so good because it really kind of lit a fire under me to like, oh, I can get this done. Let's make another one. And then, it was like less than a year later, we did Adventures in No-Fi, and it just was like, oh, now the game is just keep putting stuff. I just keep making stuff, but I'd rather have that stuff out than rolling around in my head.
Jenny Joy, do you ever think I'm cool? 'Cause Jenny Joy, I wanna drive you home from school. 'Cause there's a lot of talking you could do. We might connect on a thing or two. Jenny, I've been hoping you would say okay if I stay long enough to get to know you, Jenny Joy.
Were you letting your fans know, the Matt Geiler fans, oh, I've got this serious stuff out? Or were you kind of like, I don't know how they're going to react to this?
I was kind of like, to be honest, I just didn't, I never know what to do about it. I just wouldn't describe myself. You know how there's some people who are just, they're natural salesmen, and it's very natural for them to promote their thing.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. Like, there doesn't need to be a distinction. Like, it's just all of a piece. And they're like, here's my next thing. And I'm not even going to explain it, and it's fine. And
Right.
it wasn't that I didn't think people wouldn't understand it. It's just that I don't think I knew really how to do it in a way that made sense to me,
Right.
because my professional career at that time was very ridiculous, and then it's like, oh, by the way, there were little toe dips maybe that made me a little reticent, because, like, I'd play some shows and they'd have a merch table and they'd be like, bring your merch. And I'd be like, all of my stuff is like, people coming to a comedy show, if they pick up these albums after the show, are going to be severely depressed when they put the album in, and then it's like, melancholy
Yeah.
indie pop. So I just kind of treated it as, it'll work itself out. I wasn't like overly, trying to marry the two or make sense, I
Right.
guess.
Right. When you're writing a song in your head, are you hearing all the harmonies, or do the different parts come later? You understand the emotion of harmony.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of a pragmatist. I would say it's like 75% I can usually it's full blown. Like,
Mhm.
I know what the stack should be.
Mhm.
I can hear that. And then it's 25%, you might have most of it recorded, and then you're like, oh, I can get another one in there,
Yeah.
at a certain point, that maybe what you have suggested some other thing to you that, you might not have thought about. But usually I have a pretty solid idea of, like, how the harmonies should be. And I think that's just because, I don't know how other people feel, but the thing about the Beach Boys harmonies is though you have tons of harmony groups, and I love all kinds of harmony groups. That's my favorite thing. But there's not a lot of groups that use the voices themselves as a textural thing.
Yeah.
as an instrument almost. Listening over and over again to that kind of thing, I think it just kind of ingrains you with an idea of like, oh, two voices here would feel like this, but six voices stacked up real tight in this part will have this kind of effect.
Yes.
And so I'm usually thinking in that more of like a textural type of a mode for how it'll, feel, I guess,
Right.
for lack of a better term.
Spend the whole day by your side. I know you could fly. Valerie said under and play till you're tired. I think we should try.
Now, the next release was a single, Valerie May I. Now, this was not included on the next album.
Right.
And of course, nerdy me, the first thing I think of is, oh, this is just like the 60s where the Beatles or the Beach Boys would release these non-album singles with no intention of putting them on the album. And then I thought, you know what? I probably am a music geek and just overthinking that.
Yeah, no, it was totally supposed to be just a one-off song.
Okay.
And I'm a fan of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I know it was murder at the time, but I don't know. I like the idea of like album, single, EP, album.
Oh, no. I mean, that's the way that they used to put out records all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't, maybe not since 1998, but,
Right.
but until then, I mean, our collections are filled with, Beatles records or Beach Boys records or Flock of Seagulls or whoever, the non-album B-sides and,
Yeah.
and then somewhere, 10 years down the line in the Frederick Julius catalog, there's going to be a rarities compilation that's going to combine all that stuff that is not albums. This was another amazing album. In fact, advancing from the first two. With the first album, the confidence was there, or at least it sounded like you had that confidence. But here, it seemed like you understood again the emotional depth of the harmony vocals.
By the river where the trees stretched out, you told me what your heart heard about. I dried your tears right before the dawn, and you walked back with my sweatshirt on.
The song Summer Camp, still, this is the original version on this album, still goes through, it just pops up in my head. Years later, I'll just think of the beautiful harmonies in that song. Do you sometimes surprise yourself? Wow, this sounded better than, when I first sat down and, struck those first couple chords, or after you're done layering all these vocals?
Yeah. I mean, surprising in the sense that, what you can do if you just kind of take your time. And that average artwork was kind of the first time where I was like, I'm just going to take as much time as I need to do this,
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a thing. I recorded it mostly in, when we were still living in LA. And we had moved to Claremont. We moved into Claremont like 2013. And shortly after Valerie May I'd start immediately working on that record, and it was just writing, but also taking the time to, audition different instruments and kind of play around with what felt more appropriate, than I guess I just wasn't rushing as much. And so the approach was the same to, trying to get, harmonically like what you're hearing. But the difference for me, I think at that point was like, I'm really going to take my time and and tried to push myself and just see, and I think it was also born out of I don't know. I know there was a few afternoons where I was belly aching, to Jen about like, if I'm never going to learn to play the guitar, to a level where I can use it on a recording, and, I play the piano with 5 fingers. It's just not going to happen. But at some point I was like, well, just try it. Just see how far you can get, like that was the first time I was like, I'm trying to see how good I could do.
Turned out fantastic. Like with each record, they kept getting better.
Autumn and Elliot, there's a love story you'll never forget. Got a feeling you ain't seen nothing yet with Autumn and Elliot. Autumn and Elliot, there's a love story you'll never forget. Got a feeling you ain't seen nothing yet.
But the next one, let's go to what you said a few minutes ago, the album, single, album, and an EP called Autumn and Elliot. Another fantastic. This time, what was there? 5 songs, 5-song EP. So the intention was to record an EP as opposed to, I'm not happy with all these songs, so I'll just release 5 of them.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that was and it was kind of built around 2 songs, because I was working on 2 songs and that were the main ones, which were Autumn and Elliot, and then there's a song on there called Watercolor. And I was trying to capture a thing. I think I was doing a lot of thinking at the time about, what happens when you change from a child into an adult, and what's lost and what's gained, and what's always there. And Autumn and Elliot was a more, sunny approach to an idea of like, sometimes you hit it off with a person when you're 6 and it never goes away.
Yeah, right.
And on the flip side of that, sometimes you're such, maybe you marry when, my parents got married very young, and by the time they were in their mid 30s, they couldn't have grown further apart, So I think that was kind of what was in the air, and it was always meant to be just like this little package of songs about those kind of feelings.
Yeah.
What's wrapped up in that dynamic, a little more family dynamic like that.
Are you surprised sometimes when someone will totally misconstrue what a song's about?
So I don't know if I'm surprised by it, unless it's just egregious, where it's like, I don't know, somebody listens to Kool and the Gang Celebration and thinks it's a dirge for a funeral and are really depressed by it. Then that would alarm me.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's somebody who's hardwired to misinterpret every song to its diametrical opposition.
Yeah. But then you've got the people like someone showing up at John Lennon's house and just talking about, oh, we got these songs, we're talking to him or whatever. And then John's going, well, Paul wrote that one or whatever. And it's like these people will think the songs are about them.
For me, that's the real fun thing, and kind of the trick about a good song is I am partial to, I do love good lyrics. I try to write good lyrics. I'm not a fan of like, well, right at the moment I say I'm not a fan of like throwaway lyrics. There's so many songs that have dumb lyrics that I love, that we all love, just because, the music is the real feel. I think you should be able to take away the words and still feel
absolutely
the general feel of it. I try to write so that the sound gives you the feeling. Whatever our great songs are that we love, everybody has their own favorites, but those songs that mean the most to us, you feel them, you felt them before you ever remembered the lyrics. there's a million examples for people like you and I that are like super music lovers, you know, but guitars at the opening of a Badfinger song, they haven't even done anything yet, but you already know from.
Look at my shirt there.
I feel like you and I would waste a lot of time together if we were.
Well, if we had met at Rhino there in Claremont, we probably would have talked for hours.
My God, I used to go to that store and lose track of time. When I found that place down in the Village, I was like, I mean, our house is like a 5-minute walk from there.
Wow. We probably were there the same time.
We might have been, man. We might have been like going through the racks and not even knowing we were in there.
Yeah, yeah. You know, then I'd go, oh, he's got a T-Rex record. That's a good one.
That dude's got a Badfinger shirt. I'm not going home for dinner.
So let's talk about fixers and elixirs from
Fixers and elixirs
from 2019. At the beginning, when we first started talking about the first album, you were talking about laying down everything and then getting quote unquote studio musicians to come in and record them. You actually made that come true by, you know, picking songs from your catalog and re-recording them with studio musicians, and it's produced by Mike Post, but not that Mike Post.
But not that Mike Post. You want to hear something mind-blowing about
what's that?
Not that Mike Post?
Uh-huh.
So Mike Post is a great musician, great producer. He and his wife Carly own a boutique recording studio in it's kind of in Mid-City. It's like right off of San Vicente.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Moose Cat Recording.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this awesome little studio that has kind of the best of digital, but if you're kind of a vintage gearhead,
Mm-hmm.
you are in heaven when you step in there, because the mic locker alone is like, I don't know, stepping into Capitol Records circa 1970. C12s, you know, U87s. And as a vocal guy, I'm just like, you know, drooling.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm like holding these microphones that I've only ever seen in, you know, publicity photos.
Yeah, right.
But Mike Post, so he's a New York guy. And when he moved out to LA, he was apprenticing at some studio when they moved out, and something happened with the mail, and he started to get residual checks, just started showing up in his mailbox.
Wow.
And he was like, what are these? And he had to find the real Mike Post and go give him some mail.
Did they actually connect?
They did connect, because he had like a stack of checks that he had to go give to him, and it was like, I don't know why they're sending me your mail. But yeah, he met the real Mike Post.
Straight talk, I can't spin it. Being a nobody's bringing me down. But ask me, and I'll pin it on the fact that I don't want anybody around. Guess I'm just a sucker for solitaire. Straight talk, now I did it. I'm hearing voices everywhere.
After Fixers and Elixirs, it took a while, but the brand new album is actually available now. It's called Lonely Boy. And this time you went in with studio musicians and you recorded a batch of new songs as opposed to going back. And was that exciting? Was it daunting? How did you feel about going into the studio with this record?
I was super excited to do it because it was kind of the same cast of characters.
Mhm.
Mike was producing it. We had Butch Norton on drums again. He used to be in the Eels, but now most of his drumming work is with Lucinda Williams.
Mm.
And so he was on board again to do all the drums and percussion. And yeah, so I was excited because, we had all worked together before, and we're kind of past the phase of figuring out how we work.
Yeah.
Now that's a known quantity. So it was super fun to go in because you didn't have to do that learning curve.
Right.
And it came really easy. I mean, we recorded it in, gosh, I think we had 11 recording days for that album.
Wow.
Let's run away and leave this town. We can split tonight and not be bound, but no one will notice, and no one will care. We're running away as fast as we can. If you take the wheel, I'll pretend I'm a man. Maybe no one will notice, maybe no one will care.
The album is very emotional. Is Lonely Boy about Frederick Julius, or is Lonely Boy about Matt Geiler? Or, I mean, is it fact, fiction, a mixture of both?
I think it's a mixture of both, but I think the thing that underpins all of it is my relationship with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and which was a hard and difficult one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that way when I was a kid, and it's been that way by and large as an adult. But the album kind of sorted itself into two halves. There's a batch of songs that comprise the first half that are kind of more about the kid side of it, how it feels to have those difficulties as a kid. And then the backside of it is more about like adult difficulties with relationships. My parents divorced when I was 13, and that was it was a really hard thing for me because of the age that it happened at,
Mm-hmm.
and also because of there was a significant amount of domestic violence that characterized the time that we were all together in the same house. And that's never a fun or healthy thing to observe or be involved in.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the experience that you have as a child with that, and then there's also the other side of it of being an adult
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of it. And so you have like, and so all of that stuff for me is real enmeshed.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a song like the first part of the album, like Lonely Boy, that starts off the album, where it's a really direct approach where an adult voice is talking to a younger kid voice and kid kind of character, and saying, I get what it means to be lonely, and I get what it means to always want your father to notice you and to encourage you, and for other people to notice what you're doing, and it doesn't quite happen. I know how that
Mm-hmm.
feels.
Tell Victoria it would break her heart into pieces. Do we have to tell Victoria it would tear her apart? Now never do that to her. I'll tell you would rip right through her. And I'll never hurt Victoria.
But then there's also a song like, Do We Have to Tell Victoria, which was just which was kind of a more, that wasn't from a personal experience per se, but it was from the experience. Like, I mean, my wife Jen and I have been married almost 25 years, and you know, we have a really great relationship. But the song was written from, you know, I got to watch two people grow apart, and I was trying to write that from how difficult it must be as two adults who are responsible for these kids to know that they're not going to make it, or that something's broken. And then what do? You know, speaking for myself, I would find that incredibly hard. And so that's the voice that it comes from. That song is, you know, a guy saying like, I know it's over and it's been over for a while, but how the hell do you tell that to our daughter? You know, how do you tell that to this little person who doesn't understand how that works, you know, doesn't have a frame of reference for those complicated feelings. You know, I was trying to get at that difficulty. And in true Frederick Julius fashion, why not deal with a difficult subject by placing in the midst of a up-tempo?
Yeah, exactly.
I did funny voices for my father, and always tried to make him laugh. A funny face, and he'd laugh harder, while I'd cut myself in half. Who is the architect? Who is the same?
You see, there's another song in here that is just absolutely, it's beautiful, but it's also devastating. That's The Architect.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a tough one to sit through. Yeah. But when I say a tough one, again, I'm talking about from the perspective of feeling the song. And, but you see, there's such beauty in that.
Full disclosure, the architect, my dad's an architect, and you know, he was always building stuff. He's one of these guys who was like he was like a man's man in a way that I always felt like, oh, I'll never be that guy who can just, like, you know, he's got nails in his mouth. He can frame a house by himself, you know, drive nails in one after the other with one hit, you know. I mean, he was that kind of a guy. Yeah. And so when I wrote that song, I was thinking about that reality, but also, like, you know, how does a boy get built into a man? You know, how does that happen? What are the inevitabilities about it? And what are the things that aren't certain? And I'm also always, I'm kind of a, for better or for worse, my general headspace most of the time is like I'm a Peter Pan guy, you know. There's something sad in growing up a little bit to me all the time. Yeah. Especially because it's interesting that there's never really much of an adult in a child, but there's always some little piece of a child left in an adult. And, you know, it's sad to me that you can never go back. Yeah. And so in songs like, that's why I've always loved artists who can get that sweet spot between sweet and sad, right on that edge, that that thing that I love happy, sad songs, you know? Yeah. So
yeah, I think that's pretty obvious.
I think I'm always like in that very kind of headspace of like that, wanting to get at that very tender type of a feeling.
You're a perfect kid, so was I. Trying to get my
remember what song was the one that really started you on the journey that became Lonely Boy?
The first one was Lonely Boy.
Okay.
That was the song that started it, because, and I was sitting down and I was writing, and I think the only thought that I had at the time was, I'm going to write a song where old Matt is talking to young Matt. I'm going to write a song where, me at 48 is talking to me at 13.
Right.
And, telling him, I know how you feel.
Yeah. Right. Would you call this a concept album? I mean, I'm not saying that this is your Tommy or anything like that, but it's pretty much a concept album, from, as you said, the younger days until today.
Yeah, that was kind of a purposeful thing, because when Mike and I were talking about sequencing it, when we started working on it, I made the remark to him. I was like, kind of half joking, I said, I want to make the saddest album of all time. I said to him on the phone, I said to him, well, Mike, it's time to make the saddest record ever made. And he's like, why would you want to do that? Why, I'm like, I'm just kidding, but I do want to like have it be kind of a cumulative tugging at your heartstrings.
Yeah.
Not so much sad as like just kind of a through feeling of like aching and longing type of a thing.
Melancholy.
And so when we went to sequence it, that was a conscious thing of like, let's maybe lessen the space between this stuff so it feels like it's of a piece and it's not just like tracks.
Susan is sweet, Susan is kind, Susan is always on my mind. Susan is sad because she's so far from home now. Susan is sweet, Susan is kind, Susan is always on my mind. Susan is sad because she's walking alone now.
If you were going to compile
Mm-hmm.
a various artist mixtape and throw
Yeah.
in some Frederick Julius songs in there,
Mm-hmm.
what other artists would you put on that mixtape?
I can only go with what I'm feeling at the moment. So there's going to be a little Beach Boys on there. There's going to be some Badfinger on there. There's going to be some Elliott Smith on there. There's probably going to be some Big Star on there. There's going to be some Simon and Garfunkel on there. There's going to be some Beths on there. I don't know if you know the Beths.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be some Weepies on there.
That's new.
And there's going to be some They Might Be Giants
Mhm.
on there. And for good measure, I'm going to, you know what? For good measure, I'm going to throw in some like a one-off, like because I've been listening to it on continuous repeat. I'm going to throw in some Everly Brothers, particularly So Sad to Watch Good Love Go Bad, because I can't get enough of that track.
Well, that's the show, folks. I'd like to thank both Matt Geiler and Frederick Julius for spending time with me here on Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Remember to check out his brand new album, Lonely Boy, and the rest of his fantastic catalog. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Goodbye, everybody.
When we were young, we ran around a summer camp outside of town. Out by the pool, I drew you in chalk. Tried to convince you to take a walk.
you created a series of podcasts that sort of explain each of the songs or give the story behind the songs. What inspired you to do that?
Again, Jen, who by now you are gathering that she's some kind of an evil genius who's, behind the, pulling all the strings. But we're driving around and the album was finished. We're listening to it and we were trying to come up with like, when are we going to release it and how are we going to roll it out?
Mm-hmm.
And the song Eagle Girls takes its name from a bunch of short little vignettes and short stories that were in various states of unfinishedness.
Mm-hmm.
And they were about growing up in a small town. And I had done the song based on some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But she said, well, why don't you finish Eagle Girls and we'll roll out the album at the same time that we roll out the novel? And I was like, well, that means I'm gonna have to write a novel over the summer. And she was like, yeah, but we'll do it as an audio, like a fiction audio drama. And we'll release it in 10 episodes, and each episode will kind of loosely coincide with a track from the album.
Mm-hmm.
And we started talking about this idea of you'll hear the full song at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
But little elements from the song will be part of the sound design for the narration part of the episode. And so we just thought it would be kind of a cool way to get that project done, but kind of link it to the album. And I think the reason that made sense is because the novel deals a lot more in depth with with kind of the autobiographical elements. If you haven't listened to the podcast Lonely Boy, the framing device is it begins as an interview with the adult Frederick Julius.
Yes.
And ends with
Summerfall. Summerfall is the first episode.
That's right. And so everything that happens in between those two bookends of this fictitious podcast interview are kind of adult Frederick Julius recalling to the listener in his mind the place that the music comes from, which is his childhood. It's a coming of age story that has Frederick Julius music woven all through it. And it's a good way for people who like that kind of thing to discover the music. And it's a good way for people who already like the music if they want like a deeper, more immersive type of a thing. That's kind of a novel approach.